I've been quite positive so far about the potential of AR and VR for education. But of course, it's always a good idea to also remain a little bit critical, right? And to look at potential drawbacks of those new opportunities for education. So fortunately, a paper again from a couple of years ago, in this case, in the case of AR, nicely summarized potential issues, potential drawbacks of using those new media, in this case AR, for education. I think those issues for AR also generalize to VR and also to MR. So they summarize this and categorize this into different types of issues. And the first type of issues are technological issues, obviously. So it might be the case that getting, for instance, a VR headset or an AR application for all your students in your class simply costs way too much for a school to afford this, right? Also, if you have pupils or their parents pay for educational materials, you cannot simply ask for them to, for instance, invest in a very expensive VR headset. That might also create all sorts of inequalities in the classroom. Also, there might be some discomfort. Perhaps for some people, it's not so nice to have something on their heads for teaching. Again, this might lead to some inequalities, might be discomfort. Perhaps it's not a good idea to, for hours and hours in a row, show certain types of digital information very close to pupils' eyes. Of course, those devices, they may fail at certain days. They might not work well. You might need an internet connection that's not stable sometimes. And also, of course, one should look into safety, right? It should be really a safe method. And there should be really in-depth research into whether those methods, whether using those methods is safe, whether using it is safe. So for instance, you don't want to get into a situation where, for instance, those devices get very hot while they're very close to pupils' heads. That might not be a good idea, right? So all sorts of technological issues could play a role here, and they should be taken into account before you start using those methods in the classroom. Finally, privacy. Many of those new media, VR, AR, they fundamentally rely on recording the actual world for them to allow to add something to it, to add something digital to this. And it should, of course, be taken into account that the kind of data that's being recorded, that's being tracked, doesn't go to all sorts of third parties that could do anything with it, that could learn from it or derive some personal information from it. At the same time, there are some pedagogical issues. So perhaps some teachers are really not ready for this. So they might be close to retiring and they might not be wanting to invest in this and etc. There might be a lot of resistance. It might be too novel. They might not know how to handle this well, even after a training. Then, of course, it won't really work well for pupils, right? Yeah, you could say there might even be a tension between the two types of reality. What is real? What is virtual? If you want this to work well, there should be a nice interaction between the two types of reality. The one should correspond to the other in a nice way. Perhaps the content is inflexible. If you use an augmented reality application, it's typically already done. So the application has been finalized. If you want to add something to it as a teacher, perhaps this is not possible at all. So that might be not so nice. The final type of issues that in this paper is being distinguished related to AR, but it will also hold for VR, is what they call learning issues. So there might be even a cognitive overload because of multitasking. So for instance, reading a text is quite simple, right? Cognitively, once you know how to read. It's just one type of activity that you're carrying out. But often in the case of AR and VR, you need to do a lot of things at the same time. And pupils might not be ready for this yet. So you need many skills for AR, but also for VR to work well. There needs to be spatial navigation in many cases. You need to navigate yourself through a certain room, through a certain virtual environment in the case of VR. Often you need to collaborate in this virtual world. There are problems to be solved. At the same time, there can be text presented visually that you would have to read. So there are all sorts of skills that you need for this to work well. And perhaps pupils are not ready for this yet. So it might be too hard for them, leading to a potential situation where instead of learning things in a better way or in a nicer way, in the end, they end up just giving up and learning nothing. So again, this type of learning issues should also be very carefully be taken into account. Finally, there might also, especially in the case of young kids, be some confusion between what's game, what's part of the game, what's sort of digital, what's unreal in that sense, and what's reality. So if you're so young that you're not really realizing what is real and what is digital, or if the digital element becomes so realistic, there might be some confusion. So you might see as a young child, as a pupil in school, you might see some certain element that's digital without realizing that it's fake, that it's unreal, and get a little confused about what is real, what is unreal. So it would be a good idea first for children to learn what the real world is, and only then, if they really got some experience with the real world and the affordances of the real world, only then start adding digital elements to it, such that you will never sort of forget what is real, what's not, what the affordances of digital elements are, and what the affordances of real elements are. Finally, some questions. I think there are many opportunities. There are certainly very serious drawbacks that should be taken into account. I think the basic conclusion is that we need more research to find out whether this is going to work in education. And one question is, do these apps actually lead to better learning and retention of information? It might be the case, but we're still not completely sure. It might be different for different groups of students, depending on their age, depending on their backgrounds. Do these applications actually add anything beyond other traditional media like books and computers? If you combine different, more traditional types of learning, like reading, playing a game on a computer, seeing images, seeing videos, do people really learn less from this compared to when you integrate all of this into a, for instance, VR application? And are any potential benefits more than just novelty effects? I think this is also a very important question. So of course, for many people, an AR or a VR experience is still super novel. So just because it is novel, they might be very motivated while they're engaged in this. And compared to, for instance, reading is not super novel, right? So it could be that first, those new opportunities will really lead to advances and better learning, for instance, but it could be that once you've done this a couple of times, this sort of novelty effect goes away, and then it doesn't add anything anymore compared to other methods. So this is also something always to keep in the back of your head, like, isn't it just a novelty effect? And also in the long run, do those new media really lead to new opportunities and better ways of learning in this case?